So yes, there you go. Oh crap, that went back. Okay, there we go. Okay. Yes, all right, so we're Grateful Gardeners. So who we are, married partners in life and business. We both love nature, we love plants, we love being together. And I think it was only logical that we would pursue a farm of some type. I actually have all of my ancestors are farmers back in Idaho. And I think it's just in my blood. So
it's not in my blood at all.
No, not Sarah's, but mine for sure. And then my mom, Diana, she's sort of our muse. So when I was about 9 years old, we moved to Canby, Oregon, which if anybody knows Canby, Oregon, they know that's the home of Swan Island dahlias. And so my mom got into dahlias when we lived there for about 4 years. It's a beautiful area. I mean, just amazing. I didn't appreciate it when I was a kid, but now I very much more appreciate it in terms of the growing conditions that are just highly conducive to dahlias and a lot of other cut flowers. Anyway, she's been growing them ever since then. It's about 30 years. We value the environment, and that's her right there. That's my mom. We value the environment over everything. And so what we're really striving to do is to push both the cut flower industry and floriculture towards more organic and sustainable methods. And we really want to revitalize the U.S. flower farmer because they've been devastated for, decades now due to, policies, government policies, tariffs, things like that. So that's kind of our mission and our goal. So like I said, we're organic cut flower business based in Poolesville, Maryland, providing high quality, long lasting, environmentally friendly blooms to the DC, Maryland, Virginia floral designers, florists, and we do farmers markets as well. And we have a 3-word mantra that is we sort of always try and live by and stick by, which is local, sustainable, and collaborative. The local and sustainable is pretty understanding. Collaborative is kind of a new idea, although it really shouldn't be. We're not about competition. We're not about trying to compete with other flower farmers, especially US flower farmers. We definitely want to compete with imports because they just dominate the market. But we really try and work with everybody. We want to have partnerships with everybody. We want to do projects with everybody. Again, you'd think it was like some sort of like this shouldn't be that novel, but a lot of people don't think this way. And so we're trying to sort of, I think, chart a new course when it comes to farming and flower farming.
And business.
And business too. So as Jessica said, we bought the farm. So we started in 2018 on a 1-acre property, and it was enough to get started, but certainly we tapped out pretty quick in terms of our space, full sun space. And then we had started to lease some property, and we were trying to just expand that way. And then, as she mentioned, I got this $200,000 grant from an agency called TEDCO, which is a Tech Economic Development Council within Maryland. And it was essentially unrestricted $200,000, which is unheard of in the grant world. Usually they have all kinds of restrictions with how you can spend this money, but they basically were like, do whatever you want with it. And I was like, okay. How about I build a 30 foot by 60 foot greenhouse and put a commercial scale aquaponics system in it and grow dahlias and lysianthus year round. And they were like, great, go for it. So that was like kind of winning the lottery, as you can imagine. I mean, so really that precipitated us. We thought about trying to put this greenhouse and the system on our 1-acre property, and it was just not going to work. And there's no way it was going to work.
And if you saw it now, it's near finished in terms of its construction. The structure itself, the aquaponics system, is going to be installed in about 2 weeks. We've got a whole group of people flying out here to do that. It would never have fit on our other property. No. It's pretty substantially large.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like 30 by 60, but how tall is it?
Well, it's probably at least a good 20 feet tall. So
yeah,
it's just, it basically I mean, we should have been probably expanding to a new farm anyway, but this really kind of just gave us a nice shove in the right direction. So anyway, we bought this property in Poolesville. It's 34 acres. Basically a blank slate. That area that's in front of the house there, this large area right here, that's about 14 to 15 acres of just open space that's relatively flat. And so we were like, wow, impressive. And, that is basically a sort of aerial shot of it there, another kind of look at it. It's a beautiful property. We're extremely happy and pleased that we get access to this and we get to live here. And this is sort of an impression of where we're at now. We've cut at least 4 fields. The greenhouse there is right down at the bottom. This is it right here. There's a flower pavilion that we built that's kind of just off the screen here. You can't see. But within about 3 months, 3.5 months, this is what we've done, and which is a lot. And we're kind of like,
We're tired.
We're a little tired. We're a little exhausted. So if we start,
but the dahlias specifically are located
right
over there.
Right.
So that whole field right there, all of those rows, 17 100-foot rows are now planted with dahlias. And I would say at least half of that field is from cuttings that we propagated and started from tubers that we were able to save from last season in the garage in nursery systems that are from the aquaponics source, ironically enough, which successfully rooted up incredibly well. We have no idea in past years, just to give a snippet and then I'll be quiet. I've worked so hard for the last 4 years to source the dahlias that are going to be the most productive, suited for wedding work and for sale, ones that I knew that I would be able to move for the business successfully, with labeling all of them, naming all of them, getting them. In 1 year, I actually color coded the field like a rainbow. This year, everything is literally thrown in there and we have no idea where anything is because the move just completely through all of our plans in terms of labeling and all of that proper thing. I know what's in there is good stuff. I just don't know where it is. And so it's going to be a bit of a mishmash this year of going back through and labeling and culling that field and getting back on track with what we're hoping to be able to do, which is to create a large scale rooted cutting production for sale nationally. That's the goal for this business down the road. But this is the beginning of that.
I mean, if I'm sure many of you are familiar with a lot of the different vendors out there that are supplying tubers. Rooted cuttings are kind of coming into their own in that respect in terms of being an alternative source for getting particular cultivars. But what we're seeing is just they're selling out like left and right. Like if there are highly sought after varieties, from the variety of hybridizers that are out there that are selling them, you can't. Sometimes it's like it's like getting concert tickets, right? Like if you're not right at noon when it opens, the store opens, you ain't getting it.
Right.
So you got to. Clearly, the demand is high, and
yeah.
So that tells us we probably should be doing this. It's a good revenue stream for us. So sustainable agriculture, I don't know how much you guys know about sustainable agriculture. This is sort of our bread and butter. This is where we live, where we're trying to innovate, obviously. So just generally speaking, a definition of sustainable agriculture is really just about sort of practicing agriculture in a way that we don't compromise future generations' ability to meet their own needs, right? So we're just trying not to deplete the resources that they have. And that's sort of a generally accepted definition. And then, there's what they call 3 legs of the sustainability stool, which is the environmental component, the economic component, and then the social, and they call it economic, but it's really a social aspect of it, basically giving people access to agriculture and being able to farm, and then for it to be actually profitable as well. And so that's kind of the main focus of anybody who's in the sustainable world. And then the general kind of themes that we see is the stuff that we all know about when it comes to environmental things. We want to try to minimize how much water we're using. We want to try and reduce how many pesticides we use, herbicides, fungicides. We want less land degradation. This is something that's actually sort of a hot topic within the climate change world, but also just big ag. And land degradation is defined by the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and they really define it as basically any direct or indirect human-induced processes, including anthropogenic climate change, that expresses a long-term reduction or loss of at least one of the following: biological productivity, ecological integrity, or the value to humans. And so you can imagine these are the threats, right? Like we know these are the threats, like topsoil erosion and the processes of big ag that basically are really destroying the ecosystems of most of the farmland that's out there. Less plastic waste is another one. We're trying to reduce how much plastic we're using on the farm. And then overall, just trying to decrease the amount of carbon emissions that are going on in terms of the farming process, but also the carbon emissions that come from importing flowers from overseas, which is a huge, huge footprint in the floral industry. There's a lot of data out there about that, and I'll reference something later that if you guys haven't read it, you probably should. I'll give you some insight into this. So within the floriculture world, sorry, I got to move my gallery thing all around. Within the floriculture world, there are some things that we're specifically doing, others are doing as well, that are trying to move in the right direction. And one thing is that it's really important about sustainable agriculture is not to shame people about methods they use. You won't get anywhere, and we don't think it's an effective method to go out and be like, shame, you shouldn't do that. It's really just about, hey, here's an option, and here's something you can do, and let's take a baby step towards something. And actually, this is actually, even though might be a little bit more work, it's actually better for the plants, and you'll see an improvement in your crop production or your crop yield. And so really what we're trying to do is not necessarily just say, hey, this is good for the environment, but it also is actually beneficial to the farmer and the people buying the product. So one thing that we're doing is we've replaced what's called Horton Nova netting. I'm sure many of you probably have seen this. It's a white plastic netting that is just used ubiquitously. We still use it, but we're trying to move away from it. But this netting is supposedly recyclable, but it's really not, and it's just more plastic. And unfortunately, it entangles a lot of wildlife, and we see that impact all over the place, and all kinds of different critters, birds and snakes and rodents and things. And they're part of the ecosystem too, even though sometimes we don't like what they do. We need to protect them as well. So we're definitely trying to move away. So what we've done is we've taken steel remesh in sheets, and we bend them into three-dimensional cage structures that then you can lay over the row. And we can show you guys more images of this later if you want, but it's highly sustainable because literally you bend it, you buy this once, you bend it, and literally the cage lasts for 30 years. I mean, it's a long time because it's steel. And so they're really sustainable. It takes some getting used to, and it definitely has some downsides, but it's, in the long run, we definitely think it's worth it. One thing we also have seen that it's a great added habitat booster for birds. They love to perch on the cage, and it allows them to sort of get access to a lot of the insects that are in the field, which we like. Eat those Japanese beetles, please. Would love that. Another thing that we're doing is we're using worm tea fertigation as opposed to more traditional NPK fertilizers. So I don't know if many of you have had an opportunity to create compost tea or worm tea. Basically, it's taking compost, and in this case, we use vermicompost, so specifically compost that has been broken down by worms. And we put that into a brewing apparatus. We add some, sugar, molasses. We add some, fish and kelp seaweed emulsion for the fungal populations and to add some more nutrients. And then we brew for 24 to 48 hours, oxygenating the water and enhancing the microbial populations that we want within the mixture. Once we have that, we then put it into a fertilizer injector and we run it through our drip irrigation. And we've seen just amazing results from this. The plants are healthier. We see, just great root structures. We also do mycorrhizal fungi. We add that to our plantings or just add it to our soil to encourage that as well. So we do a lot of that kind of thing. And again, drip irrigation is something we use a lot of. Unfortunately, I wish that was more sustainable. It's plastic as well. But, until they come out with something, it's really the best option in terms of saving a lot of water. And in general, the floral industry is just highly pollutive and carbon heavy. There's some numbers out there, but it's hundreds of thousands of metric tons in certain times of the year, especially, Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, when the demand is high. And so innovation is really critical. It's absolutely critical, and that's what we're trying to do. So if any of you haven't read this book, Flower Confidential by Amy Stewart, I highly recommend you guys read this. This is about 15 to 20 years old now, which unfortunately, I think she's coming out with an update soon, but it's still relevant because what it really does is pull the curtain back on the floral industry and how it operates in terms of basically it's just all imports from South America, especially the roses. And what that process is like, and the fact that it's not regulated because you don't ingest flowers, right? Because we don't eat it. The government has said, do whatever you want. We don't care. We're not gonna monitor it. And unfortunately, there are impacts, especially on florists and designers who handle flowers almost on a daily basis for most of the year. And so this is a great book. It's really, if you love flowers, it's got some great stories in it. One of them is about how the stargazer lily was created by this total mad scientist hybridizer guy. It's a really cool read, so check it out. So aquaponics. I don't know if many of you are familiar with aquaponics. When I started sort of studying and looking into sustainable agriculture, I was looking for methods that we could try on a smaller scale that would sort of, maybe be, innovative, maybe give us an advantage in terms of, growing better, growing more superior flowers. And so I started looking into hydroponics, and hydroponics is extremely organic and highly sustainable. There's some downsides to it. But then I started looking into aquaponics, and I love that because essentially what it's doing is it's mimicking a natural system within nature. And that's basically that of a pond or a lake or whatever. Fish living within the water, excreting their waste, excreting nitrogen out of their gills, and then bacteria that exist in the air, water, and soil that then convert that nitrogen waste into a usable form that plants can then uptake. And so basically you've got this cycle that just perpetually goes. Fish excrete waste, bacteria convert it into a form plants can absorb, plants absorb it, clean the water, return the water to the fish clean. And that just goes indefinitely. And so aquaponics is replicating that system in a man-made apparatus. It uses 95 to 99% less water than field grown. I mean, that is unbelievable and really powerful, to be able to conserve water, especially in the places that, like California, where we're seeing, record drought and loss of water. Sometimes you can see up to a 2x growth rate increase, which is huge. If we could speed up, yeah, if you could speed up the time that it takes to grow something, right? Like, so in this case, like Lisianthus is something we want to grow in these systems. Lisianthus from seed to bloom is like 5 months. It's a long time. Like, if you could reduce that by a month or even 2 months, it'd be huge. You'd get, 2-3 times more harvests a year. It'd be a huge advantage. So, we're not sure if we'd see that. You don't see it with everything, but you do see usually some kind of growth rate increase. There's no weeding. Oh my God. Amazing. Right? Like, no more weeding. That's it. It's done, because you're growing in a medium that there's no weeds to grow. So it's amazing. So there's no soil either. So there's no erosion. There's no land degradation. Soil-borne pathogens are mostly eliminated. There's fewer pests in general. There still are pests, but there's fewer pests. So that means you have to use less pesticide. And it's organic if it is, because you've got to use something that's not going to hurt the fish, obviously. And then the thing that I think is the most compelling is plants can be grown at waist height, which means we don't have to bend over 10,000 times a day and save our backs. That alone is worth pursuing it, in my opinion. Like, even if all this other stuff didn't necessarily exist, if we could do this, it would be huge, right? Because, like, if there's one thing that both Sarah and I are constantly complaining about, is like our backs are killing us at the end of the day. So that's a huge thing. So the goal ultimately is dahlias and Lisianthus year round, and then to gradually expand to some other cut flower varieties that are highly sought after. I have this fantasy one day, and I don't know if it's ever going to be possible, but wouldn't it be amazing to be able to do peonies year round in an aquaponics system? I mean, I don't know if that would be possible, but you know, maybe there's a business there for selling bare roots. I mean, who knows? But you know, I think the sky's the limit with this technology. There's a lot of flexibility with it. You can do a lot of different types of plants in it. They've pretty much proven that every type of food crop can be grown in these systems. It just takes a certain amount of tweaking. And ultimately, it's as organic and sustainable as you can get with any other kind of growing. So super attractive. So this is just a quick little diagram. I know it's really small and the writing's small, but I'll just try and give you a sense of it. But this is like an overview of what the system will look like in the greenhouse. So you've got two 500-gallon fish tanks where the fish will be housed. There's a number of pieces of equipment that then process the water and move it through the system and sort of do some things to it, you know, filter out some stuff. And then that is actually shunted off into these growing tables right here. And this is basically where the dahlias and the leucanthus will be grown in these tables that are up at waist height. And so that's kind of the general gist, but there's a lot more technology to it than that. And there's a lot more going on there, but I don't want to get too deep into it. But anyway, it's someday we'll be posting videos and showing all about this on our Instagram, but we also would love to come back and share with you guys when this system is finally up and running and we're producing a lot of stems and doing some exciting things with it. So that is that. So we did do some preliminary research where we were funded by the USDA SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Agency. And this is kind of the primary arm of the USDA that funds and supports sustainable ag research efforts. We got a farmer grant from them to begin a small scale project. We conducted it in our little rinky dink 10-foot by 20-foot DIY greenhouse that I built with my bare hands, and it was an ugly piece of junk, but it worked. We used a small little, what's called an IBC tote DIY system, which basically is just it's like taking a big plastic container and converting it into a fish tank and a grow bed, and that's it. It was about 16 square feet, and I stocked it with a bunch of PetSmart goldfish that were like 10 cents, you know, get them about this size. And by the time the system was fully functioning, about a year later, the goldfish were like this. And we're like, you know, 5 pounds. Like if you don't know this about goldfish, don't release them into the wild because they literally will take over. Like they don't, because they just will, they have no, they don't have a cap on their growth. If they have food to eat, they'll keep growing and growing, right? It's kind of crazy. Like I thought that goldfish were kind of like, you know, like they'll die half the time, but man, they were super resilient. And I ended up having some pretty big fish. And actually, when we ended the system to get it moved over here to the new property, I didn't know what to do with my fish. Well, we have a pond in the back. And so I just released about 25 of them back into the pond. So, and they're still back there. They're still alive. So see them on occasion, but anyway, so that's just a little aside. But anyway, so what did we learn in doing this research? We learned that dahlias grown from tubers in these systems will likely rot 9 times out of 10. And the reason for that is not surprising to anybody who's ever grown dahlias. It's a lot of water, it's a lot of moisture. And dahlias just generally, as tubers, don't like that. And they will almost always rot when that's the case. But the at least encouraging thing was that if we grew them from cuttings, they would grow vegetatively just fine. They would produce green growth, and that's kind of a picture right here of this. This is a nice, healthy dahlia plant growing, you know, lots of green growth, looking pretty healthy. So that was encouraging. We know that dahlias will bloom. We see here, this is a totally tangerine. This is a Wizard of Oz. And then I also got Cornell Bronze to bloom in the system as well. So we know that dahlias will bloom in the system, which was really exciting because that basically says, okay, proof of concept, we got it. We just now need to tweak the system.
And if I might just add one little snarky comment. When Tom wanted to originally get this funding, he went to a very well-known organization seeking a very small amount of money to basically create this DIY system before he got funding from SARE, and was told that this was really interesting, but wouldn't be useful to any farmers, and he would never get a bloom on the dahlia in that system. And this was, call it ego or pride, or I don't know, just fear, sheer stubbornness. That was all it took for Tom and I to say, really, watch it happen. So what you don't know I have to say this because I'm so proud of my husband who has a PhD in science, and is, knows how to do research, and was just determined to, he said, the science is sound. The science will work. I just have to figure out the system to facilitate it. And he was right. And that's all I want to say. He was right. Okay, so I'm done now.
She loves to always bring that up. Like, there's these people that told us we couldn't do it,
Yeah.
and guess what? We did.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that. Thanks, son. That my cheerleader there.
Mhm.
You always need a good cheerleader. We showed that we could get blooms, which was really encouraging. And the system that we actually used was, we had the IBC tote system that we did, but then we also had this other system called autopots, which are basically these sort of large, I guess you could call it around 3-gallon pot. And in the bottom of it, it sits like a little base where it just naturally fills up with a little bit of the aquaponics water. So it's this highly nutrient rich water that's coming from the system. And it's just a little bit of water. It's not flooding it like you would normally with most systems. And so what I found was that was actually quite ideal for a lot of these growing cuttings. And what I found was that you could actually get tuber production pretty well. So these pictures up here are actually showing dahlia cuttings that have now expanded into tubers and grown multiple tubers. I never got a chance to check and see like how many actually produced like a viable tuber that had an eye that then could be propagated. But it was encouraging to see that indeed, as long as you controlled the moisture to a degree, you could get tuberization, and you could see that happen in these systems. So that was some highly encouraging preliminary results that we got. Yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The medium in those pots, is that Leica or?
Those are expanded clay pellets. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's an inert media, and it's there's kind of pros and cons. It's one of those media that, I think it works well for certain things. It's not necessarily the thing that I would use in the future, but it's what I had a ton of at the time, because you can just buy them in big bags on Amazon for $30. But they did work pretty well, and the nice thing about them is that you could pull these tubers out, and there literally was like no soil, right? So it's like, if you're doing tubers, propagating by tubers, amazing, right? Like, I don't got to wash tuber anymore. I don't go wash a tuber clump anymore. Awesome. That's great. I appreciate that. Anyway, yeah. So it's one way to grow.
And clay pellets thing. Initially, you found it didn't work. And what was the initial medium that you used before the clay pellets? You used
like you could use like a gravel, like a pea gravel.
Pea gravel, right? Why didn't that work?
So there again, pros and cons to each growing method. Pea gravel, the only downside to it is it's essentially calcium carbonate, and it will leach that into the system, and it will affect the pH. And so I found that was a problem, and that's well known. It's just if you can manage it, it's very cheap alternative. Pea gravel's cheap, right? So probably one of the cheapest things you can get. But anyway, there's lots of nuance to these systems in terms of things you can use, ways you can grow. So what's the research that we still need to conduct? And this is where the larger grant comes in, where now we've got this new facility, and now we can start asking some bigger questions. What's the ideal growing method? Like we were just talking about, like, is it hydroton? Is it expanded clay pellets? Is it deep water culture, which is essentially growing in water, but like maybe in a more controlled fashion? Is it this, nutrient film technique, which is like, very shallow amount of water, like just enough so the roots can grow into it and absorb? Is it, some other variety, something autopot related? There's a lot of variability there, and so we've got to just start investigating that. And I think one of the things I want to say is we are complete and total trailblazers here. Nobody has looked at growing dahlias in these systems in aquaponics, or really hydroponics either. So that's exciting in and of itself. But what it really means is, like, now we kind of have to start from zero, right? Like, we don't know there's nothing out there to guide us. So we really have to kind of just start trying things and seeing what'll work.
There's also, this is the only, the system that Tom is building is, as far as we know, the only aquaponics greenhouse in the world that is growing floriculture exclusively. Like we don't know of anyone else.
Most everyone is doing vegetables, right? Like it's a food production aspect, which is very much needed. But just for whatever reason, nobody's really pushed into the floriculture world at all. So that, again, I find that really exciting. You know, I mean, it's just something brand new. What are the nutrient requirements? Like, you know, what kind of levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, you know, and then moving into more of the micronutrients. You know, what do they need? What are these systems inherently lack that they might need? What are the photo period requirements? Obviously, the biggest challenge with dahlias is getting the day length established and then maintaining it so that they continuously bloom. But you realize you're kind of also inducing tuber formation, and so it's sort of like you kind of have to find this balance between you know, inducing those blooms and then also, you know, not making sure that they basically just start to go dormant and form tubers. We don't know much really about that. I mean, we know the time that it would take, you know, anything greater than 12 to 13 hours, but not too much higher than that. But temperature also plays into that as well, right? Like they really, they don't like the heat, but you know, those cooler, you know, fall days, you know, that's when they really start to hit their stride. So temperature is a factor as well. How can we hybridize in the systems? Because one of the things I'll show you in a little bit here is Sarah and I are very much wanting to be hybridizers, which is why I'm excited to be connected to this group with some very experienced hybridizers in here. And so, you know, how do we do that? What would that look like? And then a lot of other questions to ask and lots of grants to be written, and you know, just some exciting times coming up when it comes to the research aspect of this. So anyway, I just want to quickly go through this. I know a lot of you probably know some of these things, but it gives us a chance to show pretty pictures of dahlias and talk about, you know, just an amazing plant, right? Like I never knew like a lot of the things about dahlias. And then of course, you know, my mom has been talking about them for years and I've just been like, yeah, mom, whatever, you know, your little potato things that you like to grow. Which, you know, she likes to point out the fact that, like, you know, it just took you 35 years to come around. But yeah, so, you know, dahlias, they're sort of like, you know, some main versions that we know in terms of the species. They belong to Asteraceae, the family which is essentially second only to Orchidaceae in terms of the amount of known species in the family, which is around 32,000. We know there's around 20,000 plus cultivars of dahlia, which is just mind blowing. I mean, it's, you know, right up there with a lot of these other highly bred flower varieties like roses and tulips and all these things. They're incredibly complex genetically, which is something that I found fascinating. So they're octoploids. So they have 8 copies of 8 chromosomes, so 64 in total. Human beings, just by reference, have 2 pairs of 23 chromosomes, so 46. So they have about a third more genetic material than we do, which is mind-blowing in and of itself. But they also have a high frequency, a high number within their genome of what are called transposons. So these are large chunks of DNA that literally can just cut themselves out of any particular place in the genome and just move themselves somewhere else. And so this is ultimately why we see things like this, right? Essentially what we would probably call sports, right? Like things that are just, you know, essentially mutations in color and form and structure, you know, all different ways. Basically, this is what is happening. The plant has a highly mobile genome that can shift around. Now, that creates some wild stuff, but it also creates some brand new varieties that we've never seen before, and creates a lot of variety when we breed them. And of course, just a huge wide spectrum of, you know, color, shape, size, structure, petal shape, all these different, you know.
But no blue.
No blue yet. No blue yet. I think so obviously many of you, I know you're involved probably in the American Dahlia Society and in terms of their sequencing project. So that is going on right now. I think we got to get some more funding for them because we need to speed that process up. But I think once they finally get the full genome sequenced, which is going to be a real feat considering how complex it is, I think we're going to be able to start to understand, some of the biochemical pathways that are underlying some of the colors and the things that we can see. The variegation and the sort of Hecate quality of some of these guys. It's going to be fascinating. So a lot of exciting things on the horizon for dahlias. So obviously this is something a lot of you guys know. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but obviously there's essentially 3 ways that you can propagate dahlias: tubers, cuttings, and seeds. Cloning them is essentially propagating them through tubers and cuttings. And there definitely is a limit to how much you can clone. Tuber propagation, I don't think there's really much of a limit. Cuttings, though, if you take cutting, like after a while, you will see degradation, you will see mutation, that you'll see a reversion probably back to a more what they call a wild type form, which is essentially what sort of is what they look like in nature, right? Which is, single petal, traditionally yellow, red, those kinds of colors. And one of the things that we know about cloning is there's a limit to how many times you can actually clone before the DNA starts to degrade in general, right? That just happens if you just continually clone from a clone, right? And do that repeatedly. So that will happen. Seeds obviously won't flower true to parent. I think there's a lot of people out there that have this misnomer, because traditionally we think like, oh, a flower grows from a seed or a plant grows from a seed, and that's how everything is. Not realizing that there's a lot of plants that are essentially sterile. They've been bred to be sterile. They won't propagate from seed, or if they do, they're going to be completely different. And they will not be true to their parent genetically, and will not have any of the characteristics. Apples are a famous example of this, and some interesting stories there. But it's fun because you never know what you're going to get either. So if you got a packet of seeds, you say, oh, throw it out there, and who knows what you'll get. It's probably going to be a lot of single petal varieties. Yeah. So and this is a question that sometimes people ask is about that. It's like, why does it do that? So when you breed, what you're essentially doing is you're trying to drive the flower towards things that are essentially recessive genetically. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term, but basically something that does not occur naturally. You're trying to create something that does not occur naturally. And so you're driving it towards this unique state. And so if you don't continue to force that and essentially clone it, it's going to naturally want to revert back to that state, that original state of, single petals, only maybe 2 or 3 different colors, no real complexity, right? And so this is essentially what's happening when you just say, oh, just throw some seeds out there. Very likely, a lot of them are going to say, nope, I want to go back to what my great grandparents were like. And those were, in the wild, single petal, red, yellow, something attractive for bees. So pros and cons, tubers. As long as, there's an eye, a plant will grow. So that's kind of nice. You see an eye, you're going to likely get a plant if it doesn't rot out. But it's very difficult to store. And you get a lot of rot, you get fungus. Digging them is a friggin' nightmare. Unless you got one of those fancy little potato diggers, which we may invest in someday if we have the money, if we're still doing tubers. I want to tell a quick story because this is the kind of thing that, like, dahlias will break your heart. I mean, they're amazing, beautiful, just, we love them to pieces, but there's sometimes when they're just like, you son of a, we had started amassing our dahlias in terms of just a lot of different cultivars and started actually, propagating them from tuber and saving them up and storing them and doing all the right things. And I think we were bordering on 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, tubers. We were like, awesome, we're doing great. Well, when we moved this past winter, we just could not focus on our storage very well. We got them into cedar chips. We got them, as best as we thought. We tried to clean them up as best we could, but really we could not pay attention to them the way that you really should. You got to be checking on them. You got to be making sure temps are good. you know, you don't have too much moisture. And we just couldn't do that. Well, as you can imagine, when we got moved over to the new property, I think we lost maybe 40 or 50%. It was a massacre.
It was so awful. I
We
can't
cried, we
even
cried.
tell you, going through bulb crate after bulb crate after bulb crate and just seeing
whole-
rot and,
Whole clumps gone.
oh, it was so awful.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible. So, you know, that's the downside of tubers. So that's kind of why we're like, okay, cuttings. I think I'm digging on you cuttings. So rooted cuttings, obviously you can rapidly expand your inventory. There's no storage issues and they take up significantly less space. But it is harder to master. And there are some issues. They're in close proximity to each other typically, and you can get disease. You know, obviously viruses are a big thing with these plants. So, you know, pros and cons, you have to kind of take the good with the bad, but I think definitely for us, cuttings are the way we're going to go in the future. And, you know, obviously, again, no surprises here. I think, you know, for those of us who are, you know, I think what this slide is about commiserating, really, is what this slide is about. Like, let's just commiserate for a second. Okay, so they need a lot of support. Some of them are, you know, massive, right? Like, you know, some of these dinner plate varieties, the plant habit is like, they're like 7 feet tall with these huge, thick, stocky stems. And of course, the stems are hollow. And so, you know, any amount of force comes along, a windstorm, you know, snaps those suckers right in half, which is no fun, you know. Here's one thing I'll say. I don't know what it's like in Ohio. Imagine it's similar to what it's like here. It's not the Pacific Northwest. And I don't know if you've ever talked to those people, but they're always like, yeah, my pest pressure's not so bad. I'm like, oh. We get everything. And this guy over here is the scourge of our existence. So that's a cucumber beetle. And they are awful. The worst. Because it's like, you know, if you're a Japanese beetle, which Japanese beetles do this too.
They're slow and stupid and you can squish them.
But also, there's a lot of pests out there that just eat the foliage and you're like, okay, I don't care so much. Like, I'll strip the foliage. Like, I don't care if it's a cut. I'm not really caring about the foliage. But the cucumber beetles and the Japanese beetles to a degree eat the petals and basically ruin the bloom.
And so do thrips.
And other things. But these guys are notoriously bad for us. They're the ones that are really doing a lot of damage to our blooms. So being organic farm, we do the organza bag method, which we basically cover every bloom with an organza bag that we can. And this is a nightmare. It just adds so much labor and time to these guys, which are already
Well, and we sell primarily in our wholesale sales channel to wedding florists, who of course love to order the blush, the peach, the white dahlias for their wedding customers, and those are of course the ones. Oh, the bugs love. That's their favorite snack. So
don't go after the burgundies. Don't go after the deep reds.
Yeah, right. Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah. So, you know, it's just so frustrating for us because I always tell people when they are oohing and eyeing over our dahlia fields that, you know, they are definitely one of our favorite flowers. We love them. And it's a love-hate relationship because they are high maintenance and you cannot ignore them for even a moment.
They don't like our heat.
No.
We're in the depths of it right now, you know, June, July, August. I mean, it's like, you know, 95 degrees and 80% humidity. I mean, it's terrible. And so they don't like that. They kind of go dormant, you know, basically they'll grow a little bit, but they're definitely not blooming anytime soon. A disease is a problem, obviously, as I mentioned. Powdery mildew just can be rampant if you're not getting enough aeration and you know,
we get a lot of spider mite damage as well. That's something that's pretty intense here. So I mean, literally it's like every possible like impediment to a productive dahlia field exists here that we have to manage without spraying awful things that really impact our beneficials.
But I think it's worth it. And it's, you know, all you got to do is look at some of this. And, you know, I mean, these are all examples from our field, you know, I mean, you know, Rip City and Edinburgh and Rockstar and Peaches and Cream. And, you know, I mean, just on and on. Right. And of course, Cafe au Lait, you know, the queen. It's hard. I mean, I think it's impossible. Like we'll always grow them. We'll always grow them. I think we're just going to have to figure out how to make our lives a little bit less stressful when it comes to growing them and managing them and cultivating them, you know? But yeah, it's exciting.
It is.
So real quickly, I'm going to wrap up here in just a minute. So we have started our own hybridizing efforts. We started
2020.
yeah, like 2 years ago. It was our pandemic project, I guess you could say. We're huge Christine Albrecht fans from Santa Cruz Dahlias. She's amazing. She's just such a brilliant teacher, and she's
been a real mentor to us.
yeah. We reach out to her. We haven't met her in person yet. We're wanting to get out there at some point, meet her in person, and see her fields. And I should say fields. She's got a pretty small space, but see her growing space. And but her standards are like off the charts. I mean, I know to be a really truly good grower, you have to have high standards, but like it's like times she'll be going around her growing space, her breeding space, and you'll be like, she'll be looking at this one plant. She's like, how it's nice, but it's like, you know, this one little spot. And I'm looking at it going, that's like literally the most stunning dahlia I've ever seen.
Where would be the superstar of our field?
Right. Like,
I mean,
I'm like, so,
and
she's
she'll be
like,
like,
pull it.
oh, yeah, we're toss it over there in the compost pile. We're like, what?
So anyway, but she just came out with a book, which is like a dahlia breeding for the lay person. And so it's a great reference. It's like this thick. It's like a super quick read. And she just breaks it down really simple and straightforward. Now, she talks about hand pollination, and we tried it and it was terrible. We sucked at it, obviously. Like, I mean, it's one of those things that takes years and years, I'm sure, as many of you know, to do it effectively. So most of the things that we did early on were just open pollinated. We knew the seed parent, obviously, but we didn't know the pollen parents. I mean, we could guess because, you know, proximity, that kind of thing. But, you know, basically just took a bunch of open pollinated where we knew the seed parent. We'd label the seed parent, but we took those seeds and we threw them out the following year. And we saw some absolute stunners. Here's 4, but there was probably about 8 or 9 that we said, hey, you know, these are ones we really think maybe could be something. Let's propagate those. Let's pull tubers from them or cuttings, whatever we can do. So we're now on our 2nd generation. They're out in the field right now, and we're hoping that
we got them all labeled.
We got them labeled, and those we kept the labels on. Everything else, there's no label, but those are labeled, so we know those. And one of the things that we did, this was kind of an interesting quick little side note. So in the spirit of our 3-word mantra, local, sustainable, collaborative, in the collaborative spirit, we very much foster relationships with floral designers, mostly because we love the kinds of art that floral designers create with our flowers, but all flowers. And dahlias are like, you know, like the best kind of, you know, creative piece that you can put into a floral, you know, arrangement. I mean, they're the showstoppers, right? And so we've cultivated relationships with a lot of designers in the area, and we invited out 10 of our favorite designers to our property. And basically what we said to them was, we're going to start hybridizing dahlias, and we would like for you to go out into our field when everything was blooming and they could see everything, all the different types that we had. And we said, we want you to pick 2 that you want to breed, right? And so in the end, that was our effort at hand pollination, and it failed miserably.
Well, we had one.
I think we had one cross, totally tangerine and rockstar. We tried.
Yeah, and that came up.
We had
really
a few seeds.
interesting,
We had a few
actually.
seeds come out of that. So there was one that was like, okay. But everything else we ended up just doing open pollination. But what we said was, if we find any dahlias in here, like these 4 here were 4 that were selected, if we find one, we'll randomly pick one of you to then name that dahlia, and that will be sort of your dahlia. I mean, you would have thought we'd given these women crack. I mean, it was like, they were just like, what? And so they loved it. It was a great experience. It was a super fun time. We really enjoyed it. And then, you know, hopefully out of this will come something. I mean, I know that we know the odds are low that you're going to get something that's going to stay true to.
We're fascinated though, because we've done a lot of good documentation on these particular varieties, and we've labeled them properly to see how they vary this year, right? So because what we have done now is we have pulled from their tuber, so they should be replicating what we saw last year, if there's the genetic stability is actually there.
Right.
And that's the thing that, Christine Albrecht waits, this is why the hybridizers wait like 3 to 4 seasons before you even think about, introducing something, because you've got to see over and over again that you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, will it stay true? Stay
Will it
true to
stay
its
true? Right.
characteristics.
Mhm.
If it's changing or just even slightly changing, yeah, it's likely not going to stay.
Right, like the one up in the top right corner, so that is a really interesting one, and I bet this year we're going to see some crazy stuff from her, because she came out in the very beginning of the season. Her growth habit was stunning. She almost looked like a ball variety, although not quite. And her bloom count was great, all the things, and it was this stunning blush color. But as the season progressed and the temperatures began to change, we started seeing like deep magenta in the center of the bloom. And so it was only like maybe 2 of the maybe 6 to 7 different flowers that came from that plant that actually held true even in the first season. It's not likely to see that again, right? For season 2, although we just don't know. So it's just going to be really fun.
This is all also why we love this. I love this. It's experimentation. It's raw experimentation. So, it's just fun. It's kind of, there's a mad scientist element to it, which is right up my alley. And then, so last little note, I think one of the things that we're really kind of interested in doing is getting very rigorous in terms of, defining or characterizing these new cultivars that might come out, not just for the bloom, but also for the characteristics that flower farmers would care about, like how many stems does it produce? Does it produce a lot of stems? Does it produce tubers really well? Are the stems good and long?
Well, what are the
is
the bloom facing?
The bloom facing, it's like, is it at a 45-degree angle? That's obviously something that's very standard and especially very highly valued in the exhibition shows and stuff. So there's some stuff where it's like, yeah, that's going to be consistent with like people who breed for exhibition, but there's some stuff that they don't care about that we would care about for cut flower production. So it'd be interesting to see what's going to happen. But anyway, that's it. Sorry if I went long, but thank you guys so much. I really would love to hear your guidance, advice, tips, tricks, anything and everything that we can that you want to tell us about or talk to us about. We're really we're eager learners, I guess I should say. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, wonderful presentation. Any questions from folks?
I had one question in your photo with your cuttings. Was that agro wool?
So in that particular photo, that was no, those were okay. So there's been a full evolution when it comes to our propagation. Initially, we started with Oasis horticubes, which, again, don't shame us. We made the wrong choice there. We didn't know.
No,
I think it works really well.
It
It does, but we just didn't realize that we were essentially adding more foam and plastic, and so we got away from those pretty quick. We moved to agri-wool, and we liked the agri-wool, except it didn't seem to break down the way that I think that they suggested it would, at least not in our soil.
It wasn't, it's compostable, but definitely we were pulling that, obviously, after the first year, which is what made us decide to get away from the Oasis, you pull your tubers out and there's nothing had happened to the Oasis. So we just completely, it's not going to compost at all. And then the second year we were like, well, we can't do this anymore. Like, in good conscience, we're environmentally, this does not work. And then so then the agri-wool, but similarly, then we pulled the agri-wool out, and I'm like, well, okay, it's supposed to be compostable, but it's really not breaking down. So this year, Tom actually got these systems through the aquaponics source that we're working on for the greenhouse. And these are nursery systems that actually are flood and drain systems for cutting production. What we would do is, it was like a peat already filled tray. What is the medium?
Yeah, so it's basically like a pre-filled 72 or 128. And they've got the pre-drilled holes too, so you can stick your cuttings, real easily. And it's a peat, which, again, there's some people who are like, don't use peat, and I'm like, okay, all right, well, I might need to use peat. So it's a peat starch binder, and basically I think I would say that it's kind of similar to like the Root Riot cubes. But it's fully compostable. I've gotten confirmation on that. We'll see again how it goes this year, but I feel much more
They
confident
loved it.
that
The,
yeah,
the cuttings loved it.
cuttings
They
were good.
rooted up beautifully. I mean, this year was chef's kiss on
Yeah,
cuttings.
yeah,
It was
worked really
just
well. It worked really well. So,
really
and
good.
again, we'll report on what it's like in the soil, but I feel pretty confident that we're going to get much better breakdown and integration into the soil with these. So
I'll have to get a link from you because I've tried Agri-Wool and Root Riots. So yeah.
okay, yeah, I'll give them to you. They're relatively cheap. It's not so.
It's like it ends up being about like 60 cents per. I mean, we kind of did the
No,
math.
I think it's less than that.
Less than
so,
that, yeah.
Tony, I think you're muted.
Tony, you're muted.
And Tony, by the way, is a fantastic hybridizer.
Yes.
Yay.
So
Yes.
I would just like to,
Inorganic.
if I was, I would try rooting your cuttings right in the system that you have now, using the same stuff that you grow them in. I have a feeling I do all my cuttings directly into my organic soil. I don't use any Oasis cubes or Root Riots or any kind of plugs, but I'll bet you your cuttings would root very well in your system right now. And then you wouldn't even have to get a secondary medium. And I would venture to say you could probably tease them out and then put them where you want them. I mean,
Right.
I think it would be worth a small trial for you to see if it doesn't work. I bet it would.
Absolutely. No, so we have a mentor, and I don't, I'm not sure how widespread people know each other in this world. It's a small world, but I don't always assume that people know each other. We had a mentor in the area. His name is Leon Carrier, Leon and Carol Carrier, plant masters. They're in Laytonsville here. He's been doing this for, probably 25 years. And he's a massive cutting propagator. He doesn't do tubers at all whatsoever. And he grows like,
He composts them.
he grows like 20,000 a year every
Yeah.
year. So he's doing a pretty hefty cutting propagation project. He does all soil. It's all soil. And we tried his method and we failed miserably at it. So we're like, clearly we suck, or we don't have the skills that, somebody who's been doing this as long as he has.
Do you root them up with hormone?
Sometimes when I remember, I don't think you even have to. I've rooted dahlia cuttings just straight in the garden, I think they root. I had a friend of mine who sent me a picture. One of his broke off and he put it in a jar of water and showed me roots growing out of it. And I never knew a dahlia would root in water, but it was actually putting out roots. That's what makes me think that if you just used your system with your nutrients, I'll bet you they would root up really quick and you wouldn't even you could skip a whole step, which would be big for you.
Probably.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, we'll check that out. I think that's.
I think
I
it
try
would
it on a
be-
small scale. Don't go
Yeah.
full hog, but try a few of them and see if it works.
I think it'd be interesting. I mean, one of the reasons we're trying this new medium, which I think is one that we finally feel like we've got something really here, is, if we're looking to at some point root up and sell cuttings for like produce them for sale, you have to have some medium.
Yeah, that's a whole different story. If you're gonna sell them, the way I transport my cuttings is I put them in those cow pots, which is sustainable, with soil, and I root the cutting right in a 3-inch cow pot. And then that cutting, I have these shippers that they use for marijuana clones, and they fit right in and they ship really well like that. But
I'd be curious about that method.
but there's plastic. I mean,
Right.
the shippers are plastic. They're beautiful, but they're not sustainable.
And the trays that we're buying, those are plastic too. I mean, look.
Right.
There's some things you can't get
You
around,
just can't get it.
and
You
also
can't
just
get it.
for, purposes of keeping things sanitary and clean. I mean, we've got there are some workarounds that you can use, but I think to some degree there are going to be some limits, some hard stops
Yeah.
on that. because to ship anything, you're going to have the structural support to be able to support the plant. I mean, shipping plants is no small, feat. I mean, it takes some kind of mechanism to support it. So
These could be made in cardboard though. I mean, I'm sure they could be
Yeah.
made in a cardboard product or something like that was sustainable, almost like an egg carton, and they would be recyclable. But I mean, nobody's doing that now because people don't have the consciousness that you have, unfortunately.
Not quite there yet, but
yeah,
Not
we'll get
there
them
yet.
they'll
Yeah.
get there.
Well, one step at a time.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions anyone has? No. Okay. Well, Don and Sarah, thank you so much. I loved hearing this. I love watching your Instagram stories, and I will follow up with you to get that link. And maybe Tony, I'll pass your information along to them. Tony also hybridizes like Christine and hand pollinates.
Oh, we'd love to talk to you because boy,
I would love to get that.
Oh, I'd love to talk to you folks about it. It's arduous, but it's worth it. You'll get much higher percentage. You won't have to grow thousands of seedlings to get what you want. The thing is that we just can't be a bee. I mean, that's the bottom line. You'll never be as industrious as a bee. So if you can get out there 2 or 3 times a day, you're going to have a lot, but you gotta be out there, and that's the bee visits that bloom, every 10 minutes. And that's why we get so much more seed from open pollinated stuff. But yeah, I'd be glad to talk to you.
Absolutely. Would love that.
Tony does do exhibition only. So I was the girl who rescued one of his last year for cut flowers. So I'll send you a photo of that because it's stunning.
See that.
Before we hang up, I just wanted to say to all of you that I grew up in Ohio. So I'm really curious to know, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, lived in Columbus, lived in Cleveland. And so it's kind of ironic. And when you reached out and I was like, Ohio, wow, cool. Like, those are my people.
The homeland.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know where all of you are located, and just generally, like, there'd be 2 things I'd want to know. One is your weather conditions in Ohio. What are your primary challenges for dahlia growth there? But also, are any of you growing for cut production? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so most of us are Northeast Ohio. Our name is a little deceptive. We are not all of Ohio. I grow for cut flowers, and that's how I stumbled across your account. And I'm also on the ADS board, and we've just kind of started a cut flower committee. And so Christine and Leanne and Rich Gibson are also kind of part of that committee. Tony.
2 of our favorite people.
Nice.
Yeah, Tony got me involved in that. So we're really going to try to focus on building the bridge between exhibition and cut flowers. So you'll probably be hearing from me because I would love to pick your brains on it.
We'd love it.
We need to be more involved with ADS. Absolutely.
Yeah.
As to the weather, I just moved back not too long ago. Jerry or somebody who's been here longer, do you want to comment on the weather? It feels hot to me, but it's probably.
It's usually, I think it's usually 80s. When we get into the 90s, it's really humid and it's miserable, as it was the last couple of days.
Right.
You definitely need your air conditioner on then. But ordinarily, it's Lake Erie keeps the warmth into the fall because we have beautiful falls, but it also keeps the cold in the spring, so we have terrible spring spring weather. But best location in the nation.
Yeah. Nice.
Well, we're really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank
If you are not on Instagram, this is probably the best way to follow along, because I try to keep things posted, and I try to also show the good, the bad, and the ugly, because I think that a lot of people see flower accounts on Instagram and think that people are skipping around in flower fields, and as anyone who grows flowers knows it does not actually look or feel like that most of the time. So
We will, our website is, I would say, is a good website. We just haven't had a chance to update it
since the
we
move,
moved.
we literally have not even
Um,
touched that
Yeah,
website. So
unfortunately, it needs updating badly, but it's a nice site, and it's people have said it's organized well, and we just need to update the information, but that'd be another place that you could see a lot of what was going on. There you go. Thank you.
Is there an ADS society in your neighborhood?
So interestingly enough, so Tom got me as a was it my birthday gift last year? A membership to the ADS, which we haven't even been members of.
Yeah.
National organization. And then this past year we saw we have it's called the Capital Dahlia Society, right?
Yeah.
So we had not been members, and we just saw they like have an Instagram account, and I think that there's like 200 people on it, and they post maybe once every year. I mean, it's just not an active thing. And it popped up for some reason on my feed, and I was like, oh my God. We had just lost all of our dahlia tubers, and they were like, we're having a dahlia sale, a tuber sale. And we were like, oh my God, we were in the middle of all the things, but I was like, we must go to that. It was at a local library, not far from, well, far, but not that far from where we live.
They're doing the national show.
Yeah, they're doing the national show this year.
Oh,
Towards the end of September.
okay.
That's as big as it gets.
So we met like all the dahlia cool people, and then they had KAs there for sale. I mean, we thought we'd hit the jackpot. It was literally like we were so excited because we actually scored some really good cut varieties that we had lost, and that had, and it was just amazing. So, but we're not really integrated into that society.
We joined the society.
Yeah.
Today. We paid the membership fee, and we're part of it, but
we want to be more a part of it, because honestly, we're new at this. We're stumbling along. There are people that know so much more than we do, that I feel like that sharing of information is so critical in any gardening, flower. I mean, if you're a plant person, like, I could talk about this all day, every day. And I just want to talk to people who know more than we do and can school us on, what to do. And we have created really good relationships with other local flower farmers, some of whom grow a lot of dahlias. And those have been incredible resources. But to be able to have, I can, send a DM on Instagram to Christine and ask. I mean, I can't believe I have like window. We actually went and visited Leanne last year in her flower fields in September.
Yeah.
And we have right now in the ground about 75 of her seed varieties.
Yeah.
So, these are people that we really respect because they're trying to do this in a way that actually maintains the integrity of this flower. And that's something that we think is really important, because there are a lot of people out there doing weird things with dahlias or selling things that are infected with viruses. And, it's like sort of everybody wants to make money. So everybody's in the dahlia game, but not everybody is, I think, thinking through what the repercussions of doing it irresponsibly. That's just our opinion. And that's just how we are choosing to, if we're ever going to sell them, they're going to be disease-free if we can avoid it. And it's going to be done with an integrity for the flower. So anyone who knows all of the history of dahlias and they can help us, we would love to be a part of that. So we're so excited that you all reached out to have us speak tonight. And keep in touch. Like,
well, do keep September 24, 25 in mind. The show is in Reston, Virginia.
oh wow,
Okay.
it's super close.
That's what we do a farmers market in Reston.
Yeah.
Hope to see you there.
Yeah.
We better see you there. You got to go.
We'll be there. We'll be there.
Okay.
I promise.
I'll send
Thanks
you.
again, Tom and Sarah. Wonderful
Yeah.
presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great.
Good night.
I
Thanks, Jess. Nice program. A couple of things just to note. We're in the process of getting our inventory of supplies together, and from where a lot of it is stored at Brant's Barn on Miller Road in Bricksville or wherever he is, and also what's still in Dave's or Mary's garage, and a lot of the paperwork still I have to go through. So keep in mind, for those who want to show, Cuyahoga Fair is a wonderful venue because it's fair growers, go, and many of them are clueless about how to stage, and it's really a nice way to introduce yourself to showing dahlias. And Tony's still around, and Jess are going to help us out on July the 29th. Yeah.
Yes, so we're gonna do a few things on the 29th, and sorry, in one small part of the email, it said June 29th. Hopefully it was under the July header. It's July 29th, which is a Friday. So one thing that we haven't done since COVID started is garden tours. So what we're gonna do during the day, probably right after lunch, is tour some gardens. And you might not see dahlias, but you will see some beautiful gardens. So if you happen to live over by Mobius and would be willing to be on the garden tour, please email me and let me know. After the garden tour, we're gonna have a catered dinner. It'll be casual, not like a black tie dinner or anything. So it'll be catered, and that will be at Mobius. And then after dinner, Tony's gonna kind of start the workshop. So if you have questions about showing that you want to send ahead of time, you could email me, and we'll make sure that we address those questions during the presentation. But last year was my first year showing, and Jerry, bless him, took me under his wing at the Cuyahoga Fair, and Tammy, it was her first year, and taught us everything we needed to do as quickly as possible so we could get our stuff staged and ready to go for the show. And it was a quick trial by fire for me, but I ended up winning the novice division, which was exciting. So Tony usually cleans house at shows, and he is going to be full of great tips for all of us.
Absolutely. And of course, both Tammy and Jess showed us well how to do things at the national, because they go on the court on the national as well. So that was really exciting. A week after that, by the way, on August the 6th, hopefully we're going to have our DSO picnic there at the Mobius Nature Center in Aurora. So we'll be getting some details to you shortly on that. We do have another meeting July the 15th on composting. Susan Cowling is a Master Gardener from the Lake County Master Gardeners, and she's going to give us a program on composting. Let's see, in October, Nancy, you want to talk about your friend?
Sure. The speaker is going to be a man named John Burmeister, and he raises his own mushrooms. He's got a big autoclave on his property, and it's very interesting because every mushroom grows in its different medium. And so he knows all about all the different kinds and all the health benefits. And he sells to local restaurants here in Medina, and sells at the farmer's market under a cute little umbrella that looks like a mushroom. And he's a really cool guy, so it'll be very interesting.
And it'll be our Well, other than our picnic, which will be in person, and Tony's presentation in person, I think we're going to have that meeting in person as well. And it'll be at the Bush Community Room, which is downstairs in the Bush Funeral Home on Ridge Road in Parma, just south of Pleasant Valley Road.
And Jer, Ron and I are gonna do a judging seminar at the picnic too.
Oh, terrific. Good.
Yeah. We hope to have two, one at the picnic and then hopefully one at Petiti's.
At Petiti show in October, the first Saturday in October.
So we'll have two seminars.
Great. Randy, anything from Mahoning Valley or Midwest Conference?
Well, the not much from Mahoning County or Mahoning Valley, but the Midwest, June 4th, we had the meeting and plant auction, and we had about, I think upwards of 60 people in attendance, and it went well. We did some bylaw changes and as far as any structure, but I think it went very well. Tony and I had several discussions so far, and kind of disappointed in we thought the number of virus plants was up, and I can take it with a little bit of a rule, but Kathy bought one she was really looking forward to, and I got it home, and I was looking at it and I said, no good. So we have to be a little more attentive, and what I would inspire that through some of the mail orders, online orders, that there were some negative responses there, and this can be carried over into our own tuber auctions. So people have to be aware and get on board to Ron kind of laid it out where when in doubt, throw it out, because some of this stuff is showing up in tuber auctions, tuber sales, and it's disheartening. I mean, we didn't spend a lot of money, but we spent $200 over there, in Elkhart, and we weren't real happy with what we brought home. So I encourage everybody to look through your gardens and be a little more adamant about pitching stuff. You got to call it out of your garden. And I think one thing to look for is we did do at Mahoning Valley, we did do a presentation. Sharon did a nice job of the 23-minute video from North Carolina State University on nutritional. And after watching that so many times, but what I recognize, so many people, they go through their garden, especially, novice growers. And the first thing to do, they look at the plant and say, something's wrong. Now, they want to know, is it nutritional or is it virus? And it's not 100% in my mind, but if it's intervenal, if your problem is intervenal, it may be nutritional. And when it starts climbing along them veins, you got a problem. Tony and Ron, we text pictures back and forth. Oh yeah, you better throw that away, or it looks bad to me, or something like that. So you just have to be aware. I don't want to be a buzzkill, but you have to get on board, because you can see the good growers who are timid to make purchases at sales, whether they're tubers or plant sales. They're timid because, after you get burnt so many times, it's just not worth it. And so our societies, obviously, our societies live off of these sales and stuff. So that's about all I got. And Sharon, we've been trying to update the Midwest website, and she's been doing a bang up job and trying to get out the Midwest Dahlia report quarterly by email. I encourage people to go to the website, sign up, and get it, receive, we try to update and give you some articles and so on and so forth. With that, I'll button up.
And if you're not familiar with that nutritional video, you can get it from the Midwest conference website. It's like 23 minutes.
The other thing I'll share is if you are on social media, and I'll share my screen real quick. Hopefully you guys can see this, but this year there does seem to be a decent amount of people starting to pay attention to dahlias and asking questions as to if this is diseased, if it's not. They're starting to pay attention, to the patterns that they're seeing. So if you would like to join this group, I will say that not everybody in the group is an expert. They're finding things and they're asking for help. So kind of take that knowledge with a grain of salt. But when you kind of see patterns like this, this is probably virus. So if you want to look through photos or you want access to these groups, let me know and I'm happy to send you a link, but it is on Facebook. So if you're not part of Facebook, you wouldn't be able to access those.
What group is that, Jess?
So this one is called the Friends Dahlia Clinic. And it started, unfortunately, because a bunch of us bought cuttings that had tomato spot wilt virus. And it pretty much affected anyone who bought cuttings from this one vendor. And so what started as kind of a fan group for Christine and her dahlias turned into this group of all of us living our worst nightmare and having to chuck thousands and thousands of dollars of cuttings in the group. So bad thing is they have to see is good thing is more and more people are learning about dahlia viruses. And I think the awareness is really growing, especially on social media.
Yeah, it's a good video also from North Carolina on nutrition, nutritional deficiencies. It's well done.
Yeah, and Dr. Papu has one on the Dahlia Society of Minnesota that's on YouTube. So if anybody wants that link, email me and I can send you that link as well.
I excuse me. I actually plucked I have someone plucked the photos off of that 23-minute nutritional video, and it's on my phone. So I carry my phone and go when I go to the garden. I got my phone. I see something suspicious, now if I suspect it might be nutritional. So I open that up and I go through, is it a calcium deficiency and la, 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 it just gives me a tool.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm not an expert. I'm not 100%, but it gets me closer to there.
Yeah. Nice idea, Randy. Okay. Q&A on dahlia culture. How are we doing?
I have a question.
Okay, Mark.
So the dahlias are growing beautifully. Most of them are, up 10 to 12 inches and 10 to 12 inches wide and pinched and looking great. But what is the explanation for the inevitable 3 or 4 tubers that just put out the tiniest little growth, thin, spindly, gets about ½ inch above the ground, and basically just sits there and looks at you while all the other tubers to the left and the right are growing 1 inch a day. I dig down, I touch the tuber, it's firm, back end of the tuber is fully rooted, but it's just got this spindly little stem and it just starts, but it just stops and it sits there and it's probably going to die. So that's 3 or 4 of them out of 100. Any explanation as to why they do that out of the blue? No cultivars in particular, just randomly. I get a couple every year that do that to me.
Tony, any thoughts?
Well, the only thing I could tell you, Mark, is that some of those are going to go on and rot if you give them enough time. That's a telltale sign when they just don't want to move, that tuber is not healthy. Even if it's got roots, it may be rotting, or at least a portion of it. I find the same thing happens to me, and I don't know any way to get around it, you know. But I think a lot of times it's just a moisture problem, and that tuber is just not happy. You know, it's not mobilizing the starch and that's in it to put growth into that. And it's almost like when these tubers rot, it poisons the growth, you know.
Yeah.
But I have the same problem. I get a number of those every year too. It's not that you're doing anything different than the rest of us.
So what I did this year that I really liked, since I always have many more tubers than I know what to do with, I planted 2 and sometimes 3 tubers at the base of each of my metal poles and let them grow and picked the one that was the strongest, healthiest, best, and called the other ones out. And I found it was a really good way of making sure every stake has a dahlia instead of those random stakes throughout the garden that don't have a dahlia that drive me nuts all summer long, having that open space. So that's how I achieved that this year.
Yeah.
But I still have open spaces. So it wasn't,
You know,
100%.
I think most of us have, you know, I had, again, the same problem we all experience. And I just replaced 4 plants last night, you know. I always have like a couple trays of potted up tubers that are growing real well that I can just pull one and just pop in. And so I've learned over the years to just keep a couple of trays of healthy ones and just replace the ones that I had. One today, I've never seen this, but I had one that just 2 sets of opposite leaves just wilted like spaghetti, and the rest of the plant looks okay, and I can't find a borer in it or anything. So I have no idea what's going on with that. I'm going to have to probably look at that more closely in the morning and see, but there's still stuff I see out there all the time that I don't understand.
Is the borer that gray caterpillar that's down in the soil and it eats the stem?
Yeah,
like a cutworm?
No.
Well, yeah, it'll actually, I get them where they actually bore in and then the plant above that just dies.
Okay.
You know, and I get it on my tomatoes occasionally, you know. I don't know if it's technically a corn borer or whatever it is, but once it gets in there, it just screws up the food and the water supply to everything above it. The other thing that'll do that is if you get that sclerotina, you know, when you pull those plants out, cut that stem longitudinally. If it's all black inside, you've got a fungal infection inside the plant, you know, from bacteria in the soil. I occasionally get those too.
One thing that Tony just talked me into doing is I had one that was wilting really bad. And I told Tony, I'm like, I'm gonna let it go. They either live or they die. And he's like, no, don't be lazy. Like, dig it up, look at it. And sure enough, like the main tuber had rotted, but it had grown enough that it was starting another secondary tuber. So I cut it off, like Tony encouraged me, put it back in the ground, and like this week, perfect. It's growing like a champ. So that could be a way to kind of rescue your dahlias if you catch them quick enough.
Coletta, how are yours doing?
They're doing really well. They're doing good. But I did have a question that follows and fits in, I think, just like in the last 2 days, it just felt like maybe 2 or 3 of the ones growing really well started to look wilted. But I am watering them from the base. But is it because of that intense heat that we had?
Yeah,
That could also be a problem, and they'll come back.
they should come back.
Okay.
These
Okay.
90-degree humid days, they just don't like that.
Okay.
Be careful,
They should pop back.
be careful not to overwater.
Yeah, don't overwater though.
You know, I grow a lot of tropical plants, and at this time of year, when things are newly potted and newly rooting,
Yes.
plants are very sensitive to the hot sunny days, like the last 2 days. Even today, they were wilting. Wilting is not necessarily your cue to water.
Okay.
Wilting is your cue to get down on your hands and knees and poke around the soil gently and determine if the soil is still damp and moist. Do not water. They're just stressing, and it's actually better to let them wilt and fight and have the incentive of putting out roots. Keep watering, and you negate their desire to try to grow more roots, and you can actually rot them out.
Okay. Because really we've been fighting with that high heat, but then the storms that came through. So we had both bad things happening, the heat and the water. So, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Mark's point is really well taken. That's really, really important. The only thing I would add on the wilted ones, if you see, they should come back rather quickly once the sun gets off of them. But if they don't come back rather quickly, then you start to get suspicious that maybe you do have some rot started. And those are the ones that you should poke around a little bit, try to feel that tuber. If it's mushy, do like Jess said, just cut it off as close to the base as you can and it'll recover quickly. I mean, a lot of times if you leave those alone, it will recover once that tuber completely rots away, but it'll take much longer.
Okay. I'll look. Thank you.
Diane, how did you like Ron's garden?
Oh, you're muted, Diane.
Unmuted?
Yeah, there you are.
Oh, okay. It was fabulous. He knows so much, and I just couldn't learn enough. I couldn't absorb enough from him.
That's terrific. Are you in Akron?
I'm in, I live in West Akron, but my garden's in a community garden over in Cuyahoga Falls, just across the valley in the national park.
Yeah, nice, very nice. Yeah, good. Any other questions?
I did have a question about the 2 days that were in the mid-90s. Would there be any value in putting covers over the dahlias for shade?
I would say yes. Randy sent me a picture of just an amazing technique that he uses on newly planted dahlias that I think is one of the cleverest things I've seen recently. Randy, are you still on the call?
Yes.
Tell them what you do when you have a little bit of a problem like that with when you got a plant that maybe doesn't have enough root system, it's been newly planted, what you do with those flats.
Well, that's generally the problem is the plant actually outgrows the root system. And to keep it hydrated it just takes time for those to match up. So what I've learned in the last 3 years I've been doing, Tony and I had a discussion here, I guess maybe a couple of years ago about his old property where he had a lath house. So I got to thinking, I mean, basically that's a filtered shade. So what I do is I take the black trays that you get from your garden centers and tray up your pots and so on and so forth. So what I do is I take one end and stand it lengthwise. I slide the long end, I slide it down over my stake. And it goes on the south side of the stake and it shades that plant. And it does give that some stability and a little bit of a chance because the wilt, it does shut down some of the wilting very well. But that,
Send me the picture and I'll put it on the website as follow-up to this meeting.
I will,
I have a lot of problems with bunny rabbits in my vegetable garden. And so I bought these wire waste paper cans from the dollar store. And that's how I protect them. So today when I planted some new dahlias, I thought, well, we've had so much heat. So I covered them with these wire waste paper cans. So they're shaded.
Oh,
I don't know if it helps, but
Yeah.
well, you'll see it another day, right? Yeah. Yeah. Nice idea.
and sometimes as far as the hydration point is during the heat of the day, I do take a 2-gallon sprayer out and I just lightly mist each plant and it does vigorate them a little bit. Whether I'm helping them or I'm setting them back, I'm not sure.
Anything else from anybody?
One little thing. Is it okay to talk about the store?
Go ahead.
So one of the things that we have put together, and you'll get a link in the email tomorrow, is there's a store that we're gonna sell some Dahlias of Ohio merchandise. So there's different colors you could choose from, different sizes. I did order some of the women's shirts and sweatshirts in this water bottle, and they're very nice. I did not order any of the men's clothing. Maybe I should have gotten some for Nick, but it's pretty easy to navigate. And then there's a little markup, not much, honestly, it's very low. And that extra will go to the Dahlia Society of Ohio and kind of help us for future programming and whatever the club needs. So the link will be in an email that's scheduled for tomorrow. So if you're interested.
And how nice, we won't all have to wear men's clothing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jess. That was a great idea.
Like them shirts.
Yeah, I will say the women's shirts are real cozy. That V-neck, I ended up getting 2 of them. So,
And are they pretty true to size?
yes, I would say if you do not like a slim fit, to order up.
Okay.
So I think I got like a large and an extra large, and the extra large I feel more comfortable in. They both fit, but
Hi, Misty. How's everything in the East Coast?
Good. I'm looking forward to coming to visit. I'll be there next month, right, Jess?
Yeah, end of the month.
Yep. So
Yeah,
we'll
it'd be
come.
great to see you again.
Yeah, fly out for a couple of days. That'll be fun.
Can't wait to see you.
I got a whole bunch of friends in Ohio now. Yeah. So so I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. Wonderful presentation today. I mean, the
Yeah.
Zooms have been spectacular. A lot of great content. So looking forward to the composting one too. So thank you.
also finally got our tubers in the ground last week.
Oh, well, they're coming along. I was kind of wondering, has anybody ever held tubers outside, like not in pots, but just like, like extra tubers, and have they maintained, throughout the year? I thought I might try to experiment with some and see what happens.
Just like in the air?
Yeah, or like in a cooler. I mean, I know I've had a couple extra tubers that, I've left in my floral cooler, some have shriveled up, but some of the tubers have done pretty well. And I was just wondering if anybody's like grown, like kind of left stuff in vermiculite and seen what happens. Just
Well,
wondering. Not
I've had
that-
them go, I've had them go in storage for 2 years and still be viable.
right?
So yeah, I think you know, I don't think it's ideal. I
Right.
think you're going to get a lot of losses, but I mean, they're incredibly hardy. I mean, you know, the will to survive is just incredible with them. You can experiment around with them. Once that skin hardens, I mean, they shrivel after you dig them in the fall right away. But once you take them out of storage and they've been in storage, they don't shrivel very much after that. And I've left them just in plastic shoe boxes without any medium, just
Right.
on the bench for months,
Right.
and they just
Right.
they stay plump, you know. And if
I
some of them
know.
want to start to grow them, you know.
Right. And so I didn't know if like maybe I should, you know, check on them and snip some of the sprouts or just leave them. I'm gonna mess around since I have a few and just see what happens.
Experiment.
But,
That's fun.
yeah.
Let us know.
Yeah. So, but looking forward to seeing you guys. We'll see you soon.
Yep. Okay, any other questions from anybody? Or any other comments? Anything we missed? I don't know if any of the, these are most people are new, I think, that I see here, but Mary Lou Jessup was a longtime member of, I think East Liverpool originally, and then Mahoning Valley, and she passed away this past week. So if you knew her, she was a wonderful person, always smile on her face and always wanting to talk about dahlias. And I know her sister actually, who's a math teacher, and she now lives in Florida. And in fact, I was going to get together with her tomorrow in Columbus, but Margie won't be able to make it. Anyway, if you knew Mary Lou Jessup, just wanted to pass along the information that she passed away. Okay, any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Jess, thank you very much again for running the show. And we'll see you, I guess, next month, right?